So again, Frank, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Frank Petzold. I'm a visual effects supervisor, mostly on production side. For this particular film, I was the overall VFX supervisor together with two vendors. Yeah, how long did we do post? I think 8 months post plus shooting and all that jazz.
Awesome. It's really cool. I was curious too, at the beginning of your career, I guess like going back to your early childhood even, like did you always imagine you would be in some kind of creative career? Or what did you imagine doing?
Well, it was sort of given to me a little bit. My dad is a graphics designer. It was funny because it was pre-computer time. So, he got me very early involved. I wasn't too much interested in graphics, but he had a dark room where he was doing his lithographies. And I think with like 11 or 12, I was doing, his exposures and the lithographies for the printers and all that stuff, because he couldn't just type a headline and print it. So that was sort of the earliest exposure I had with, exposure, and using chemicals and photography in general. And then I think it's a bit cliche, but I did have my first Super 8 camera when I was 15. Playing with it. Strangely enough, when I looked at the stuff, I was really, it wasn't even stories that I did. It was really just sort of collages. So I had a pretty good idea even going through school. I mean, for me, school was sort of a thing where I just couldn't wait to be done with it. I wasn't particularly bad or good. I sort of just, knew what I wanted to do. And in my last year in school, I started looking for internships, and there used to be, in my little hometown, there used to be a small film production, literally film, that was, again, pre-computer graphics. And I just started there as, just cleaning stuff up and sort of, rigging stuff and on the stages and everything, and got very quickly introduced to my first Arriflex 35 mil. And I sort of, went over being the camera AC, loading stuff, and driving to the lab and everything, learning exposures. I sort of had a mentor cameraman. So I started actually being a cameraman for a while. The one thing they had in the studio, which was crazy, they had an old animation stand. I guess they call it, in the States, they call them rostrum cameras. Where you basically have a camera looking down at a glass table. You can move that in X and Y. And can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And I sort of fell in love with this machine. And you wanted to work at night because you had to count exposures all the time. And sometimes somebody would pop in and say, "What do you want for lunch?" And you were like, "Did I expose this one? Or am I about to expose?" Those kind of things. So I did that for a while. That was fun because you did visual effects without even knowing that you did them. Like you did multiple exposures, rewind, and everything is sort of, other than this little mechanical counter, you didn't have any reference. There was no video playback or whatever. You just had to really do your homework. And then had a sleepless night until the driver from the lab came the next morning. And that was sort of my start in visual effects. And then, of course, at some point you hit a point where like, I wish I could do more. And that was roughly about when sort of they were starting to work on Jurassic. I did a little bit, again, pre-internet, did a little bit of research and found out that the one guy I want to find is Phil Tippett, who previously worked at Allan, but then opened up his own studio. And I just kept writing faxes for like months at a time. And I basically said the same thing. It's like, I just want to come by. I just want to be there. I'll work for free. I don't care. I just want to be there and be part of this gang. And then I think a month and a half later, I got a fax back and it just says, "Then just come," in typical Phil voice. So I took literally a flight just for the interview from Europe. And then in the afternoon, I was flying back. And showed up with my film reel. And Phil was just stringing it up and looking at it. And he was like, "You know what? That's perfect timing because I need somebody." We're also just learning the CG aspects of it. So I need somebody who's interested in computer stuff at the same time knows how a Mitchell works or an Arriflex or, whatever we had. And I need somebody for set. I was like, all right. So he didn't tell me what the project was. He had a bowl of roasted crickets from the Japanese store. And he was like, "Do you like bugs?" And he offered me a cricket, and I was so nervous I just ate it. And he's like, "You're hired." And that's what turned out to be Starship Troopers. So I was incredibly lucky to sort of jump in the cold water with at that time, I think it was the most expensive film until Titanic came along. I learned so much. I mean, the old-fashioned stuff, you know, do we really need a computer here? Can't we just do it with multiple exposures, or, you know, let's do an old-fashioned split? At the same time, sort of prepping for the few things that computers were able to do back then. I mean, that was a big task, just to even find out, yeah, I mean, we could do a model and we could render it, but 16 hours a frame, we're not going to be able to do that. So what else can we do? And that was a great school back then. So yeah, I got stuck there for like, I think 13 years.
Wow. Obviously, Phil Tippett has been monumental to the whole film industry and the history of visual effects, but that being one of your first big projects, like, what was the experience like?
The cool thing about Phil is that even though you're like in your early 20s, you're there and you're equal. And at the same time, he expects you to be just as responsible than some producer who's handling millions of dollars. And that was always, so, you know, there was always this underlying, everybody's afraid of Phil, even though he's actually quite funny, and he's a really, you know, loyal guy, and we're still good friends. Just saw him a couple of weeks ago. So we all learned a lot. And at the same time, we knew that if something didn't work, it was up to us to figure out how it works, because Phil gave up with the computer. He would sit in dailies and give us comments, and very, very smart about animation and weight and all that stuff, and framing a shot and all that. But he wouldn't touch the mouse, which was really, really important, because he didn't worry about technology. We had Craig Hayes for that. Craig Hayes was basically sort of inventing at least our computer pipeline. Of course, we were right at the good spot. We had ILM across the bay, and we had Pixar next door. So especially with Render Man at that time, that was a great asset. There was, you know, we would play football together. The cool thing about Tippett Studio, and it's still to the day, they still have a stage, you know, where Phil would do his old stop-mo stuff, and he just finished Mad God there. So while we're trying to figure out how to light a model, you know, there was no volumetric lighting or anything. It was really spotlights, and if you didn't have a light in the front, it was like lighting out in outer space. There's no bounce. So we would just, you know, go over to the stage over lunch and just, you know, Phil always would make maquettes of the creatures. I was plopping on the table, and then you burn your hands on the old Mole Richardson lights. But it was always a great experience. And then you could take that back to the desk and go, oh, you know what, 3-point lighting worked great. We put the rim here, we put the key there, and then we need a little fill. From the bottom looks cooler, you know, and then also at the same time playing with the lenses. Computer graphic people at that time, you couldn't find them. They were either from MIT doing research on computer graphics, or from UC Berkeley. But they weren't like the creative type that wanted to make a movie. So as supervisors and lead, we sort of had to bring those two worlds together. You know, you had these stop-mo guys, the older generation stop-mo guys, that didn't know how to use a computer, but could animate really good. And then you had the computer people. So there was this whole thing, I don't know if you heard about the DID device that Craig built, where he used armatures, and then he would use the encoders from computer mice, put an encoder on every joint, and we wrote some code that we could translate all the joints into Softimage 3.7.
Yeah, I used to use Softimage 3.7 Extreme on the SGI. That was
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the SGIs alone. I mean, that's the you know, those expensive things that now you can't sell them on eBay. But when you watch Starship Troopers, the first shots where the bugs come in and they sort of, you know, introduce themselves and put their beaks up, these were basically stop motion animation. Or we had the system where it could actually record live, so we had like 3 guys on an armature going, okay, now go, you know, and they would record it, and then the animators would clean it up.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fun to look back at that, like in how much technology's changed. I think my first big project I ever did was for a video game. It was right when Starship Troopers came out, because I remember taking a day off to go and see it and trying not to think about the CG in it, but obviously the big mass amounts of swarms of them later in the film is just like, how many render nodes is that? It's just one of those things just back then you're not used to seeing so much on screen. I was curious, like, what were the biggest challenges in your mind on that film in particular?
The computers couldn't do much. So, particle simulations, forget about it. That wasn't something we wanted to do. The other thing is like, soft parts. The whole muscle, what's standard nowadays. You have a muscle system, your model never buckles. You have volume shifting going on and all. We didn't have that. So part of the deal that, since Phil worked with Paul Verhoeven before, and they knew each other and how to work and all that, Phil was saying, you know what, if I do the bugs, I have to design them. And that was sort of Craig Hayes's part. He basically would design the bugs with keeping in mind what the machine can do. Obviously no fur, no, volume shifting and all that stuff. So, I mean, I got a little toy. I mean, these are all ball and sockets. Well, basically the idea was look at an ant. How an ant works, you have an exoskeleton and it's all ball and sockets, and it works great. The tricky one was the brain bug. The brain bug was like the soft thing, but we were quite far in production when the brain bug shots came along, and that it was a bit easier. And I think he did like a displacement. I think we did like displacement films that we basically, little clips that we put in the model in the rendering to get the rippling and all that. On the Tippett stage, I was just for months shooting elements. And that's something that that still sticks with me, even on All Quiet. I could, nowadays you could probably do a little dust puff or an explosion in Houdini and get it, good right and everything. But I'm the kind that, I'm just looking at it and going, why? I could just do it right here. Not at the same time with the actor, obviously, but so there was always the idea of like mixing old-fashioned technology with the new stuff. Of course, we didn't, have to reinvent the wheel like Avatar, but that's something that I learned on Troopers. We were just shooting elements, and I think that's why the Troopers holds up so well, even on film nowadays. When the bugs are running, all the footfalls, the dust that they kick up and everything, these are all elements that we shot on green screen. Grace is, shooting in baby powder with pellet guns and dust.
Get creative that way. Obviously, you were at Tippett for quite a long time. Just even looking back that far, I was kind of curious, are there any life lessons that you carry on to this day? As you mentioned, shooting practical elements is one, but just things that you learned early on that you still kind of practice even now.
Well, I mean, it's sort of what I just mentioned. It's sort of like, only because VFX are done in the computer, you don't necessarily always have to use the computer. Little examples is like somebody sits down and simulates a candle light, the flame of a candle, where I would go, you know what, get out of here, get over there in the dark room, point a camera at it and shoot it. You're done. It's not that I'm against this stuff. It's just it helps me keep my mind free, and I can be more creative, because it's sort of like you don't think about technology too much all the time. It's like if you want to do something, you have to think of money the whole time. It's you're not going to be creative. And to me, it's visual effects is always like, I used that example before. It's like when you paint a picture, whether it's oil or acrylic or whatever, a painting, and the painter sort of just doesn't even look, that just grabs something, like he's a big brush, or I'm just going to use a toothbrush or whatever, and then they just do. What I find sort of, it always steps on the brake when you really have to start dissecting a shot and go, here, and we're going to do this model, and then we have to look at that, and then we're going to do this simulation on top. Once we have this, you really have to plan it out so well, because expensive code might have to be written, maybe some hardware has to be built for it. that it's tough on just going on set going, this looks great. You know what? If we do this and just put a mirror right here, we can do that, and we got the shot. And of course, I mean, everything has to go through compositing, but it's just the feedback is so much quicker. You just do slap comps, and there it is.
I still feel with CG versus doing anything with your hands, it's still there's even now, like 30 years later, it's still definitely, you know, a lot of banging your head against the keyboard trying to get things to, you know, it isn't like things just got so intuitive. It's just like playing with Play-Doh.
You know, if you have creatures, you know, of course you have to go through the box. There, I worked on Tarzan, and we had a whole jungle of animals, and of course we had to have it. That's something that we couldn't fake. But again, it was sort of the thinking of, like, there's a sequence where Alex Skarsgård, or Tarzan, is cuddling with lions, and you think about how am I gonna? It's not just about you don't not only think about the problems that, you know, close contact will cause with the model and all that stuff, but you have to really think about how am I going to work with the actor on this. Or in Terror, I had a shot or a sequence where Jared Harris is killing this monster at the end by shoving his dead colleague basically into his mouth, and then, you know, throwing a chain around his neck and then strangulate it. You really have to go, damn it, how are we going to do this on set with it looking like it's strenuous to him, and there's actually forces pushing against him. And that's something I have to go back to all the Tippett days, because Phil would really just look at it going, you know, what if there was no computer and he's actually fighting a man in a green suit? And then you think about how to do it, and then the rest sort of comes automatically.
I love that. A couple of other big projects that obviously you've worked on many. What was your experience like on Armageddon? How did that project come around?
Well, Armageddon was, I think it was a 911 call. Yeah, we had shots came into the studio, and we had to be quick, I remember. And we were basically responsible for these, I guess it's the asteroid that they're landing on, creating this environment, and also then the rocks that came in, or the meteor was a shower that came in. And that was a bit tricky, because they had to be so quick, and we couldn't really be like too clean with stuff. So I remember just animating tons of like lights, something that, I mean, back in the days that was frowned upon. You don't want to move your light or animate it, and we just, you know, whatever. And, you know, just in the explosions, we killed the highlight values, just let it blow out. Because we were going back to film anyway. I mean, all that stuff was still going through the film recorder, and you could really sort of, it's like I guess like a distortion on a guitar. You could just sort of crank it up, because, you know, once it goes back to film, it sort of evens out. I don't know, we were shooting from the hips on that one.
And what about Hollow Man? Like, from memory, because it's so long ago, but again, living in Australia, I was kind of very disconnected from the film industry, so I was working in VFX, but a lot smaller projects. Hollow Man, Tippett did the mouse scene, right? Or what other sequences did you guys do?
Well, it was the show was split. It was Scott Anderson, I think, on the Sony side, was doing the dissection of Kevin Bacon, basically the first, you know, really layering a human being when he slowly dissolves into, you know, transparency. We were basically, you know, once he's invisible, we had Tippett, and again, it was a Paul Verhoeven show, so Phil and Paul have a history. We were basically responsible for the rest of the film, where we had to sort of show an invisible Kevin Bacon through all different elements, water, fire, smoke. He jumps in a pool. And that was, again, it was a lot of fun. I did that show together with Craig Hayes, because Craig really sort of, he used to be a machinist before he started doing animation. So he really goes back into the shop, the metal shop or the wood shop, and he starts building stuff just to sort of find out, how are we going to do this? Or how does it even look like? I mean, I remember we had long discussions, some over beer, Just to go, how does an empty hull of a person look underwater? So to us it was because we knew that if you have like a Coke bottle underwater, there's a lot of refraction going on. Mm-hmm. But how would a human body who is much bigger look like, and assuming that the thickness is the same? So we built plastic models of humans, and then went to the public pool. And I'm a diver, so went down, checked it out. We shot references, and then tried to figure out how to do it. I mean, that was the time when they had time for VFX on set. We shot everything with motion control. So every take, we had the motion control camera that was live operated by the DOP, mm-hmm. and then recorded. So we could do a take with Kevin and one without. And that's how we sort of, we took him out of the plate, but then we had to, of course, add, like, for example, that in order to make him visible, they kick off the sprinkler system. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden you see droplets on a body, and we were thinking, how does it look like really droplets running down features of a person? So I remember one afternoon we actually we bought one of those kids pools, mm-hmm. and filled it up with milk. Okay. And then somebody volunteered to get in there and then slowly emerge. And we shot that, did a high contrast of it just to see what actually happens. And it was this kind of fun. I mean, it was a huge playground, but it always had a purpose. And working for Verhoeven is great because he really sticks to what he wants to do. So when he does a board 3 years earlier, it'll be that board. He's not going to go, oh, now that I see it, why don't we try this? He sticks to it. He's sort of like Hitchcock-like filmmaker that by the time he shoots, the movie's done in his head.
What was it like working with Verhoeven in terms of like visual effects? Obviously, he's got a big background doing special effects like RoboCop, etc. Mm-hmm. I've met him a couple of times more through personal relationships, just met up for lunch or whatever, but I've never worked with him. I was curious, like, has he always been very quick to adapt to new technology or to put trust in the right people to, know what they need to do?
I think it's more trust because, I mean, RoboCop and Starship Troopers and Hollow Man was all the relationship, Tippett and Verhoeven. I don't think Paul really cares about the technology as long as it looks cool. What he likes to do is he likes to sort of overdo stuff. So, sometimes we did stuff that is like, well, this is physically accurate. He would say, well, what happens if you double it? So, he had a little bit of, or has a little bit of Tarantino. Because if it looks good, let's do some more. And that was particular, for example, I was doing the blood sequence where Kevin Bacon is invisible, and one of the nurses or the doctors, she's locked into the freezer, and she finds those blood bags. She opens them up and just flings them in the room, and slowly, one by one, a bloody Kevin Bacon is visible, which is a very strong image by itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, it could have been ink, but Paul wanted blood. And then again, we had this whole experiment. It's like, okay, you see the front cover with blood, but then there's nothing, and then you see the backside. So it was tricky, and it's one of my favorite sequences actually because it's so graphic.
Yeah, no, me too. Like, it definitely stood out. I think stuff like that is just fun anyway. Let alone the backstory you're sharing about all the experimenting, which sounds just as fun as well. So you also just talked about Golden Compass. You worked on the wolf sequence, is that right? Yeah. What was it like? You guys you won an Academy Award for that one as well, right?
No, that was, I think we came in as another studio, and I mean, that was a huge show that was split up in I don't know how many shops, and we were sharing forgot the name of the bear, but we basically did the wolves, and then we got the show, and we really, I mean, that was a project that was, for me, for the first time, it felt like, okay, this is how remote working works. But the cool thing was that the animators really could do what they wanted. I mean, they really sort of, they're so vicious, those those wolves. We sort of also the framing where we'd place them. I mean, we didn't talk much to the director about it. It was mostly, I think it was Mike Fink. Mm-hmm. He was sort of giving us direction, but also sort of let us do. And most of the time that works the best.
I definitely want to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. Obviously, that's your latest and greatest. Traditionally working the vendor side and moving to the production side as like a client-side VFX soup. What's that experience always been like for you? Like, do you have any advice for other people who are looking to have a similar career, let's say move from vendor to client-side?
Well, it's actually, it's fun because you're the one who gets to cast the shops. And that really helps sometimes because, I mean, every shop and every one of them admitted, it's like, this shop is very good for animation. I mean, like creature animation, you have a shop that does great robots, and you have the environmental shops that do awesome matte paintings. And it's great to be able to say, you know what, this is a job for this vendor. As an advice, I could just tell, but that's just my case, stay out of the producing side of it. Because, I mean, that's something I had to do on All Quiet because it was a European budget and it's not as established, the pipelines, as you would have on a Warner Brothers project where there's clearly a VFX producer and you have the coordinators and everything. You sort of have to piece it together because the budgets are not that big. That's something I don't like to do, but sometimes have to do it. So, you know, while you're thinking about shots, you also have to look at the numbers. Like, how much did that cost again? Ooh, you know, the one thing that's always difficult is like with every freelancer, you're not being supported by a shop. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're a VFX supervisor that has a project, but you are at ILM. You know, you have the support of the shop and everything. As a freelancer, you're trying to get your own jobs and all that. But I've been doing this for 33 years now. So, I got a thick skin in that respect. And actually sometimes like after, for a show, for me, it's most of the time like a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, from starting reading the first script to the last hour of grading. I like to, take a couple months off afterwards and lick my wounds.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you there. Starting on this conversation about All Quiet on the Western Front, how did you first get involved with that project?
I worked with the director Edward Berger before. We did The Terror together. That was produced by Ridley Scott, and it was a 10-part show. I did something else in between, and then I got an email from Edward Sumper just out of the blue, basically saying, do you want to get the band back together? And he didn't even tell me what it was. And then I was then he sent me the script, and I'm German, so this book is really it's like edged in our brains. And so you have huge respect for this book. And it was one of those things where I didn't even think about, usually when I read a script, right away ideas and technologies pop up in my head. How are you going to do this? And this one, I had to read it 3-4 times before even thinking about VFX. Because you sort of right away knew that you can't do the typical, spectacle war film. There's no heroes. There's a definite story, like a mission, a message in this book, and we had to do it right, and it couldn't be, one of those fireworks type of thing. When I thought about how we're going to do this and with whom, and I actually, thought back to The Terror. I worked with a shop in Prague, UPP Victor Müller. They did great set extensions. Because we shot The Terror on a green screen stage. We built a boat and it barely fit on the stage. So it was always like, the generals pointing into the distance, and then the green screen was just a few feet away from them. And it turned out very photorealistic. So I wanted to work with them again. And then, it's sort of, you read the script. I met with the producer and Edward, and then The first thing was to establish what do we need to have on set and what can I bring to the table. So that was a discussion, a very tight discussion between art department, Christian Goldbeck, myself, and SFX. And there's safety aspects. Of course, the tank didn't go over Paul Bäumer. And you narrow it down to the point where okay, we need about this many shots. And again, it was sort of like I was able to channel like the old way of doing it, where I would tell the producer, in order to make this look photoreal without distracting and not making the science project out of it, I need time on set. And they just, they were open to it, and it's like, yeah, okay, let's give you time on set. I know it's for them nowadays, they just rock through a day because they know they can do anything in the computer. But I wanted to stay photoreal, also to respect my budget. And if you shoot real elements on set, nobody questions whether that looks funny or not. Mm-hmm. It just is the way it is. And you have a little bit of a sort of the creativity comes back and happy accidents. You experiment with SFX. What do you want to put in the charge to make this huge dust plume? And then you start, you notice that you're actually you're making films and you're not this VFX technician, and we were shooting at an airport, in an abandoned airport outside of Prague. So we had a lot of space and we had a few trenches dug out and dressed, but I also asked for a special piece of a trench that could support a tank, so I can do all the tank sequences there. And then I was able to build a green screen stage outside, which was great because the lighting always matched. If you shoot elements in the studio for an outside background, you really have to be careful with the lighting, and they always stand out somehow. But if you do it outside, you have the elements, you have the right light. And same with the explosions. We were so far away. I was able to set up a few hundred yards further north, so I was able to actually pick a few hills against the sky with the polarizer, then shoot explosions they were perfectly keyable. The same goes for black burning smoke. We had like those diesel racks that we set on fire, and then you have this. All that stuff really helped, and they almost turned into characters in a way, because it helped us during the comping phase really sort of get some geography to the shots, because you never knew where the guys were running or where they were, because everything was so dense, and we made it on purpose, very dense in compositing. But sometimes it was good to see something in the background that you could just sort of make out and go, that's, that we're back to him now because there's the smoke. I mean, comping was so heavy on this show, especially with just rotoscoping alone. It's a nightmare. They're always motion blurred.
Yeah.
Nobody ever stands still. And we wanted to have tons of layers. We didn't just want to, cut them out and then replace the background. We really wanted to layer it, so it felt like you're like, it's almost like you're underwater in like this soupy mess. And I think that helped a lot. And of course, James, our DOP, it's great. I had so much fun working with him. But he's a fan of using wide-angle lenses. You want to be close to the actor, so you feel like you're with them. But you always see everything. Yeah. You practically see the curvature of the Earth. But I don't know if you noticed, and I love James for that, and also Edward, there's an unusual amount of static, locked off shots in this show, which is absolutely unusual for an action film nowadays, and long edits. I mean, we have full CG matte paintings that sit there for 10 seconds.
Wow.
And that was so rewarding, because you're working on this huge shot, and it's not just cut a second and a half. It's like you actually can look at it, and that was really refreshing.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you spend months on a particular shot, and then once you see without handles in the edit, it just blinks by. It's just like, that for that. I was just breaking down a bid the other day with my EP, and that was one of those conversations came up. It's like, well, we shouldn't charge too much because these are really short shots. But it's like, it doesn't matter how short the shot is. It still requires the setup. So yeah,
those problems, of course, as a VFX supervisor, you have to be. It's your responsibility too, and that's why I'm always on set. I never take shows anymore afterwards because I don't want to fix somebody else's ideas or if something didn't work out. And a lot of time, depending on what director you get, they haven't done CG before or just basic stuff. You have to educate them. You have to work with them. You have to throw out ideas. Sometimes it's just a matter of making a shot simpler, just moving the camera by a foot. Or, just go, hey, you know what, if we do it from down here, it looks cooler and it's much easier to do and more effective. Like, for example, the it's a horribly graphic shot, but it was really fun to work on is when the tank rolls over the soldiers. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those shots where everybody always gasps in the theater. We had a lot of time on set to put the shot together. So I was able to not only shoot different layers for the shot, but I was able to relocate the camera to another set where I could do pieces of the tank. And then, on the next day, I had some time because they were doing dialogue to shoot some matching, wall pieces. And it came together textbook. It was really could be like a nuke advertisement. This show. Of course, I'm always saying that everything was done with elements. We did have a boatload of Houdini simulations, especially when the camera was moving. Of course, your element falls apart. But we I guess the general philosophy was to just see where we get with our elements, mm-hmm. and then use CG to mend it. Or Houdini particle simulations rather than the other way around. Of course, the tanks were CG models. The one tank that we had that is in close-up, we had to augment a little bit to make it look real, authentic. And of course, the planes and all kinds of. The rats are real, by the way.
Oh yeah.
I shot them on a stage. It was when we were shooting the signing of the capitulation, basically. Daniel Bruhl inside the train car. There was a little small stage next to the one stage. So I went a couple of days before and I went to the AD, says, can I have the stage? I want to try doing the rats real. And we found an animal wrangler who had a few rats. So I built like a green screen channel and had him run towards camera, duplicated that a bunch. And some rats got away. I wonder if Daniel Bruhl knows about it. He was next door.
I guess I'm just curious for you, like, how do you stay on top of technology? Obviously, there's new tools, new techniques, different ways to do things always popping up. For you, do you find it important to keep your finger on the pulse, or more just kind of trust in the people that you work with? I
do spend time looking into things, and I love comping myself, so that I use a lot. And then also, there's newer stuff like this time around. We tried the grading. We used DaVinci, and at the same time we used Fusion to do some simple shots right then and there. When we literally had two stations, and the DOP and Edward were grading, and I was playing around with camera shakes in Fusion, the DaVinci stuff. I'm trying to keep away from the MIT technical stuff, like the particle stuff and everything. That's something that's I trust people. I found that at least in, the last couple of decades, that you get more new software and they can do new things, but I think the general approach to things is still the same. You need a background plate, and you got to work with that's the other thing. You got to work with the actor. It's like you have to advise them, and like I said before, especially when there's a fight, you better do your homework, because actors can get grumpy and say, why do you leave it to me? You should have figured this out. And that's, I don't think it's ever going to change. Of course, stuff gets quicker. Those render times, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No more 3-day renders per frame.
Yeah, and then the machine crashes.
Yeah. That's great. And what about future technology? Is there anything you've seen recently, whether it is being able to shoot depth with cameras or whether it is AI or anything else? Like, is there anything that is going to caught your eye that you're keeping an eye out for?
Well, what I of course love is what Joe Letteri did on Avatars, using AI to help animation with wrinkles in the face and everything. Because I mean, if it goes, which eventually, we'll have to do perfect humans, not just stills or like little stunt doubles. That's what we need, because it would be impossible to animate the 20,000 muscles in your face. And there's like, I don't know, there's so many faces we're so trained looking at faces. I don't think that will ever be something that animation alone can solve. So I was very interested in that. What I like nowadays is I always bring a 3D scanner on set. Mm-hmm. I did that on All Quiet as well. And that's a huge help, just to, they're so quick and you just pop them up and you got the model, whether you need it or not. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I really appreciate just for being on set. And the gray sphere has sort of less importance nowadays. But overall, I mean, I think these are the two things. It's like AI to support animation. Yeah, and just being able to work quicker on set. Back in the 90s, we had shot references on SLR film cameras with rolls. We would have bags of film rolls that we bring back and had to catalog and all that. And now you point your 360 up in the air and you got your shots.
Definitely become easier as time progresses. Honestly, this has been really great to catch up and get to hear a lot of what you have to share. Is there any links, anything like that you want me to include in the show notes, or other than check out your latest work?
Watch the movie.
That
helps the most.
Perfect. But again, this has been really great, so I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, Allan. Great. Cool.